Hey everybody, Evan Kirstel here. Happy Friday. We made it through another week. Today I'm super excited to chat with Bob O'Donnell, analyst extraordinaire at Technalysis. Bob, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Evan?
I'm great for a Friday. Yeah, I'm doing well. We've passed many events out there in the world. First time I think we're having a one-on-one chat, so I'm super excited to catch up on so much.
Yeah,
Maybe first introduce yourself, and you've been in this space quite some time. Who is Technalysis Research?
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I have been a tech industry analyst for over 25 years now. Of course, I started when I was 10. That's what that means. But no, but yes, I have been an analyst for a long time. Prior to that, I was in tech press. And prior to that, I was in high tech music equipment press, so which was a lot of fun. But
Wow.
yeah, I spent 14 and a half years at IDC as an analyst there. And then it'll be 10 years in December ago that I started Technalysis Research. And so I am what we call an independent analyst, and I work with a whole variety of big tech companies. I do research, and we're going to talk about some of my newest research shortly. And then I provide consulting and advice, messaging, strategies, what have you, for pretty much all your big household tech names. And then I write for USA Today and Forbes and a column for LinkedIn that also shows up on Seeking Alpha and TechSpot. Do a fair amount of media interviews as well on various things, earnings and all that good stuff.
A busy man to say the least. So, of all the universe of tech topics we could talk about, what's on your mind today, this week, this month? I'm guessing it has something to do with AI.
Wow, what a shock. Generative AI. Yeah, so one of the things that I do as an analyst is I do independent research. It's something that it was a skill set that I acquired during my time at IDC. And when I went independent, it was something I felt was really critical to be able to
Mm,
keep the veracity of what I had to say. You love to be able to back things up with data, and nothing like having your own data. So
mm.
over the years, what I've done is I've done research on hot topics. And the funny thing was, when I started this year, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was kind of leaning towards edge-based stuff, what have you. Then all of a sudden, boom, generative AI hits. It's like, I know what I'm going to do this year, because these are big projects. They take a long time to do. And I develop the questionnaires. Then I work with my client base to make sure some of their questions are and what have you
Nice.
are figured out. And then I work with third-party survey hosting companies. I'm started out using the exact same ones I used to use when I was at IDC. I've since evolved a little bit since then because, pardon me, the world of online surveys has changed rather dramatically and not necessarily in a good way. So things have shifted, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But then I do the research, get the data, and then crank through it and generate some reports. And I just published last week this study on generative AI. And you can see the slide here. And funny, quick little story, by the way, about the process.
Mm.
Um, of course, when you're talking generative AI, I'm doing a study on generative AI. I'm like, well, yes, I should use generative AI as part of the process, right? I mean, it seems silly not to. So, and it's I mentioned it because it's an interesting example of how dramatically I think this stuff is going to start impacting us across the board. As analysts, as content creators, everybody is going to be impacted by this. So I spent, a good week. I mean, not constant because I always had other things to go, but it was probably a fair amount of time that I spent um, crafting my initial questionnaire. And then I thought, well, gosh, I wonder what happens if I go on to Chat GPT and say, hey, create a questionnaire for me on generative AI, 20 or 25 questions, complete with answers, whatever. And I came up with a little prompt, and, I hit return, and bam, 30 seconds later, comes back this survey. And it's like, damn, it's really good. Now, what was fascinating was, and this was the part that was really interesting for me, the 80+% of what it came up with, I already had, which was great.
Mm.
And in fact, it was almost even worded in remarkably similar ways. And I was kind of shocked, but I felt good about that. But there were a couple of questions it came up with that I hadn't thought of. And I thought, well, of course, then what I should do is integrate those into the study. And that's what I did. And then I sent it off to my clients and got feedback and added some additional things. But I really leveraged, in this particular case, it was ChatGPT, to help with the questionnaire. Then when it came down time to actually create the report, which I spend weeks and weeks and weeks doing this, I was so desperate to get access to the version of Office, Microsoft 365, that is now OpenAI enabled. Unfortunately, it's in a very limited beta. And despite my working with Microsoft and my pleading, I couldn't get it. So I had to do this whole thing on my own. But I did use, and I've actually used this for a while. For those of you who know PowerPoint well, I've been a PowerPoint person for a long time. They actually added a feature that I consider sort of one of the first generative AI features called Designer. If you've ever used PowerPoint, it's glitchy and there's a lot of problems with it, but it does some interesting things that give you ideas for design. So a number of the slides in this deck that I'm going to show you a little bit of were actually created with Designer, which is also sort of generative AI. So
brilliant.
Having said that, I figured we'd dive in. So what I did is I did a survey of businesses. I mean, there's obviously a lot of discussion about Gen AI for consumer, and that's fine. But the action is in business and what's going to happen in business. So the goal to this study was to understand how are businesses using or thinking about using or starting to use, what have you, generative AI. What sort of applications? What are some of their concerns? How do they think about the packaging and the pricing? What sort of vendors do they want to work with? Those are all kind of the big picture questions I wanted to get to. And I made the decision early on to do a survey with multiple industry verticals. So things like finance business or wholesale and retail or tech and telecom, construction, all sort of the big industry. There are known industry breakdowns by the U.S. government standards. I've used those kinds of breakdowns in the past for other studies. And I thought this time around, I'm going to do verticals. I ended up doing 10 verticals, and I'm super glad I did because, as I'll show a couple of slides, there were some dramatic differences in verticals. These were all U.S.-based companies, either medium businesses, which I define as 100 to 999, or large enterprises, which is 1,000 plus. So I did all that. And then the last point I was going to make is since I referred to it, one of the things that's happened with online surveys is it's become a side hustle. There are people who are now professional survey takers. That's all they do. Yeah, it's bad. And of course, what that means is they do everything possible to game the system, and they don't necessarily know what they're talking about. And, when you're doing 1,000 people, you don't want any bad responses. You want nothing but good responses. So over the years, I've learned all kinds of tricks. You put in trick questions where they have to get the right answer. The survey companies scanning for IP addresses. But I mean, people have figured out all of this stuff because why? You get money to take a survey, or in the case of the particular company I'm using this time around, they have basically a points system. And if you do certain surveys, you get a certain number of points. And at some point, points translate to Amazon dollars or whatever it is.
Wow, I had no idea the tradecraft involved
but
here.
There's a huge, and I learned this the hard way a couple of years ago. And it's funny because I've talked to other colleagues who do this sort of research at big companies, small companies as well. The quality of the data people are getting back today from online surveys is horrific. Like literally, I was getting to the point where I was throwing away 80% of the respondents because I could tell they were garbage because of all the tricks that I've learned. And I'm like, this is untenable. It's completely untenable. So last year, for the first time, and then I kept it going this year, I switched back to good old telephone-based surveys. And what's interesting about that is it solves a couple of things. One of the biggest problems with online surveys is people rush through them, like, answer 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and that's what they do. They blow through these things. And again, there are ways to look for that. And I used to look for that and take out the worst, but you still had problems. This one, when you do a telephone-based survey, every single question is read to the person. They also see it on screen. It's called a computer-assisted telephone interview, CATI. It's been around for a long time. It's just a methodology to approach this. So every single question is read to them. They see it in front of them as well. They see the responses and they think about it and they answer the question. So it makes everybody have to think about every question. And the average time spent on this survey was 28 minutes. That's a long time.
Wow.
Because when you used to do online surveys, people always said, if it's more than about 10 minutes, you're going to lose people and they'll just drop off and they'll stop doing it. So long story short is a lot of methodological precision was applied because of the challenges that exist with online surveys today. And believe me, that's a very juicy topic for discussion another time, but I've given you a flavor, to understand. So anyway, I keep talking. If you want to ask me a question, you got to jump in, dude, because otherwise I'm just going to keep going.
I just want to wind you up and let you go. This is great. So yeah, let's dive in. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so let me take you through some of the studies. So as I described here, you can see what the purpose of this study was, and then I talk about the methodology since I did that. And it was fielded throughout the month of May. And then, again, it took about 7 weeks of number crunching and chart crunching.
So hot off the press. It
is hot off the press.
Indeed.
The full study, which if for clients who I have, most of my business is based on retainer relationships with the big clients. That's my business model. And clients again, they had access to the survey early so they could influence the questions and what have you. And then they will get the full study, which is 151 slides and a live presentation. So I do that as part of my service to them. But then what I also do is I do a smaller condensed version, and that's what I'm showing here, that I make publicly available for free to highlight, some of the top hits from the study. In order for people to get a better sense of that.
Yeah, it's all on your website. That's a great resource.
Yeah, so it's a good way to do it. All right, so we're going to dive in. So I'm going to take you through a couple. I'm not going to do this is about 20 slides, but even that takes a while. But I have 2 slides of what I call the key findings and some of the other points in this slide deck just build on each of these individual things. But a couple of high-level things that became clear from this study. First of all, everybody loves numbers. So here you go. 88% of the people who responded to the survey of U.S. businesses said they're using generative AI. 88%.
That is almost unbelievable, but I believe you.
I mean, that's the thing. It's one of those numbers you're like, wow, that's huge. And it is. And, what's interesting is even of the 12% that aren't using it, the vast majority of them are at least willing to consider it, just not yet. They want to wait and kind of see how it is. So almost nobody is like saying absolutely not, never going to do it. So it's interesting.
And were these across the board, small business, SME, enterprise?
Yeah, I didn't do small. I did nothing but they had to be at least medium business in this particular case because I wanted to focus on that. I mean, small business is interesting, but for the purposes of this study, I wanted to focus on the larger ones. But anyway, people are super excited. Top things people are doing, probably not a surprise. It's productivity, it's content creation. But, there's still a lot of questions of what is this actually going to mean? How are you going to measure it? Things like that. And then for some industries, and I'll talk about this in a second, software coding tools, right? The ability to generate code using these tools is becoming very popular. And that's a big deal in the business world. That opportunity to create new applications and leverage these tools to build better, tighter, faster code is a big deal.
Well, I thought it would be pretty early for developers or code generation.
Well, because what you see is a lot of people, again, the people who have jumped on this early and are digging in tend to be the more advanced people. And I'll talk to them in a little bit. But the other thing is what was fascinating was there's a huge gap between what were the top applications people were currently using, depending on which industry they were in. So while I summed up the total and I just gave you some of that, if you look at it by industry, then you'll see there's some big differences there. And what was also interesting, I asked questions about application usage 2 different ways. Number one, what are you actually using now? And then number 2, what would you rank as the most valuable Gen AI applications to your organizations, whether you are using them or not? And interestingly, in most of the industries, those were different, which meant a couple of things. Number one, it means not all the tools that people are looking for are quite available yet, and or they can't find the version of what they want just yet. So bottom line, lots of opportunities still, lots of differences, a lot of need for tailored bespoke solutions per industry as opposed to just blanketing. However, there are a lot of challenges as well, right? People are obviously concerned about things like copyright and some other things. They're also worried about their skill sets internally. Do they have the right people to be able to do this? And for a number of organizations, that's a problem. And it's also very clear that there's a lot of education that has to happen. People are confused by things like, am I actually buying access to a foundation model? Or am I, like an LLM, like a ChatGPT, or am I building an application on it? And if I'm running the application on it, do I, just use my own data? And if I do, is that stored locally or is that stored in the cloud? And do I really want to build my own model? All kinds of confusion, even amongst IT decision makers. So bottom line is there's a lot of work to be done on that front. And then, there is a fear factor out there as well. There are people who are genuinely fearful of this technology, and we're willing to admit it. So, and there's a fear factor about jobs, because one of the questions I asked, because it's the elephant in the room, is how is this going to impact jobs? And it's going to, and it's starting to in a minimal way right now. But the data suggests that there's a lot more impact to come, and that's going to be important to watch. There were a lot of capabilities that people wanted to see that weren't there yet. I talked early on about, we all have, if you've used any of these tools, it's the prompt, what you type into the tool at this point. At some point, it'll be spoken and it'll be other methods of entering your request. But you put into a request, and that's the prompt. The words you choose and the order with which you choose them and the details you choose to include or not in that prompt have a staggering difference on the quality of the output that you get. And you can take the same prompt and apply it to ChatGPT or to Bard or to some of these other models, and you do get different answers. So the problem is most people have no idea what they're supposed to answer. But I don't know, give me this. Everybody initially was all, write me a poem about some weird topic, and it would just bang out the stuff, and people are like, oh my God, how does it do that? But, when it comes down to actual getting work done, and now they're starting to apply real questions, you have to learn how to do that. And there needs to be tools to make that easier for everybody. There's some people have said, oh, well, one new job category that will be created from Gen AI, and I agree with this, is a prompt engineer. But in essence, for this to go mainstream, every single human being who uses this is going to have to become a prompt engineer of sorts. So you need to integrate training on how to do that. And that's not in these tools. And that was really strongly requested. Another thing, 91% of companies saying they want to be able to watermark or notify that certain content was created with Gen AI tools, either if it's internal content versus external content. But very few of the tools have that capability. So that's something that people are looking for. In terms of where and how they run this, as I started to talk about this notion of a hybrid architecture, where maybe I run the foundation model that still sits in the cloud, but I use my own data and it stays locally, or how I run that architecture in sort of a hybrid cloud model is something people are thinking about, but they definitely want to customize it with their own data. Problem is, they're not always sure how to do it. And unfortunately, each vendor is approaching it a little bit differently. So sometimes, people are talking past each other because of the differences in how some of this stuff works. One really interesting thing was I asked a question about companies if they were interested in building their own Gen AI models. There's been a lot of talk about people building custom models. Well, I got news for you. Very few people want to do it except in the tech business. And this was one of the most fascinating data points in the whole study. And I'll share that one slide in a little bit. A lot of confusion, too, about go-to-market strategies. Am I buying the model? Am I buying an application? Is it an API? Do I buy it as a service? Do I use multiple models, all powering multiple apps, or is there one model per app? Just so many permutations on this. And again, huge confusion about how that should be done. And then lastly,
was there a big, just to ask, was there a big difference between, regulated industries, verticals, companies versus the unregulated ones?
Yeah, there was some. That's a good question, and I'll have to double check. I mean, because some of the things I had were regulated. I have a government vertical, for example.
Healthcare. I'm thinking,
I had healthcare. Exactly. I had some of those regulated industries, so I do have data for individual industries. So yes, there's certainly some differences there. And then the last thing is this notion of running generative AI on a smartphone or on a PC without a connection. We're just starting to see the beginnings of that. And I asked about that. And, there is interest there, but I think there's still, again, a lot of uncertainty about that. So bottom line is, and now I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I'll cover this one. As I said, 88%, that was a fascinating number. I also asked, do people actually have a formal policy about its use? Because, there's been a lot of stories already about companies who've cut off access or only allow for certain things or what have you. And only 7% of the companies who are using Gen AI currently, well, again, as of May, had a policy in place for its usage. 36 or 37% more were working on one. And then of the small percentage of people who weren't doing it, what was also interesting was 10% of them had a policy actually formally forbidding it. So it was an interesting extreme to see that. So again, people are still working through how to deal with this.
Sounds like kind of social media policies in enterprises in the early days. It was a bit of a free-for-all. It still is. And many companies have policies. Some still don't. So it'll be an evolution, it seems.
Exactly. And the difference with Gen AI, of course, is some companies have already put in some of their own proprietary information, and then all of a sudden it was discoverable. So the risks are significantly higher, which is why I think you see a lot of people being concerned and policies around all of this being developed and changed as we speak. And then, not a big surprise probably to anybody, but only 5% of the respondents said they did not think Gen AI would have some kind of impact on their work. Certain numbers said it's going to have a profound impact. Some said it's going to have some kind of impact, but only 5% said, no, I don't think it's going to have much of an impact at all. So there you go. Another interesting thing was that it's not just about efficiency, although that was the top reason why people want to use Gen AI was to be more efficient and higher levels of productivity. 22% said, hey, we want to be able to generate either new revenue streams or develop new business models because of this. So they're immediately looking to be able to somehow monetize their use of this. And then another point was the fact that, of the people who were leveraging this stuff, a roughly 75% of them were actually C-suite. So right now, this is a high-level corporate decision in terms of what's being done.
Wow.
All right, so I'm gonna jump around. There is, by the way, folks, if you are interested, if you go to technalysisresearch.com or just, you can remember technalysis.com, no A in the middle there. It's not tech analysis, just Technalysis, common problem. You can download this deck I'm showing here for free. But here, for example, here's the benefits that people said. And I have a couple of quotes. One of the other things I do as part of my survey methodology is I make everybody provide what's called a verbatim response. That is a open-ended response at the end that says, hey, what else do you have to say about Gen AI and what do you think it's going to do for your business? So I have, we're 1,000 people, so I have 1,000 of them. I took some of them that I thought were particularly relevant and spread them throughout the survey just to give a flavor of their thoughts. But here you can see increased efficiency was number one, but new business revenue, 49% are hoping that that's going to be, and as I said, 22% are already working on the actual income levels. That was in a separate question. So then this was the usage. I mentioned this earlier, usage, what they're currently using versus what they see as important. Internal search I mean, a lot of people are seeing Gen AI as a refined version of search. I personally use that all the time. So if I'm on a call and somebody's talking about a topic, or maybe they drop acronyms. I mean, Lord knows in this business, it's ridiculous how many acronyms there are. You're like, what is that one? And, so I go look it up while I'm listening to a call. And if and I used to do that just straight to a Google or a search. The problem is you'd get back 10, links you'd have to click on to figure it out. Now, boy, you type it in and you get back that response in a summary, and you can say, what is this? Why is it important? And how's it used? In layman's terms. Boom, you get back 2 paragraphs. You can read it while you're still on your call and be like, oh yeah, okay, I got it. And so, but applying that idea to companies' own internal resources and the ability for people to find and search through that was considered the most valuable potential opportunity for Gen AI, which is pretty interesting, I'd say.
Exciting.
This is an eye chart, but it's split by industry. So you can see the 10 industries that I have the information on. It shows you some of the rankings here. Some of the features that people are looking for. I talked about integrated prompt training, 62% said they wanted that. The watermarking, job stuff. So 10% of companies said they have either replaced or moved people because of Gen AI already. Now, it's not a lot of people. On average, there's only about 5 people. But 36% of companies said they are planning to. So there is no question that we're going to see some job shifts that are going to be painful for some individuals because of this. But
these are white collar, professional jobs, I think.
That's exactly right. They could be, it could be tech support call people that get replaced with bots, because we're seeing a lot of CRM-based applications where that's a possibility. But there's going to be other things as well that are going to be impacted. So there will be new opportunities, though. Remember, whenever we saw this, right, when the PC first came around, it was going to replace all kinds of different things. All kinds of technologies have, in fact, forced changes in the job market. And Gen AI is not any different in that regard. It's just, it's hitting at levels that in the past used to be immune from any of that, like you said, to white collar jobs. So I think that's where things get a little scary for some people. But it's going to be something that's interesting to watch, and companies need to be aware of that and then think about this and think, how can I train my employees to use these capabilities so that, in fact, they can be more productive, and maybe they switch to a different role because we don't need them, for example, to transcribe meetings anymore, right? There were people that did that. We've got transcription tools now that pretty much make that unnecessary. Real-time translation as well. That's another, there's a lot of different areas to think about.
And when you think about, some of the takeaways here, there can be winners and losers. On the vendor side, it's pretty obvious that some of the big winners will be Microsoft and Google, big tech, Amazon, the infrastructure providers, NVIDIA. Would you agree there, first of all? And also, are there losers, or is this sort of a win-win for traditional or existing vendors?
I think it's going to be a win-win. And so perfect timing for my current slide.
Oh, here we go.
One of the questions was, what vendors do you intend to work with? And I only listed 10. There was an other option, and there were a few people that suggested other choices. No one really stood out in the other group except for a couple. No more than 4 or 5 people selected any other smaller company. But, it's the big names that you'd expect, right? OpenAI, on the survey, it said OpenAI, ChatGPT. And so not a surprise that more people selected that than anything else. But there's a couple things to bear in mind around this. Number one, if you look at just this list of 10 and you add up all those numbers, because obviously people could select multiple, on average, people selected 4 vendors just from this list. So multiple people are going to be winning here. And you can see there's a lot of pretty high percentages. So it's not like there's only one person that's going to win. I will say it's going to be challenging for a lot of the smaller startups they're trying to get in. There's obviously a ton of effort in venture right now to fund new Gen AI startups with creating new services and what have you. I think there's going to be a very high uh, wall for them to overcome because there's so much work being done by the big guys. So I think this is going to be a case of the big getting bigger, but it's going to depend on people's priorities, what have you. One of the things I show here, this is my little spider chart at the bottom. I have that for all the vendors in the full report, but shows you the reasons why they selected a particular vendor. You know, what degree of trust do they have? What degree of experience with their tools? What do they think about the pricing or the expertise, what have you? So something to be aware of. And yeah, sorry about the video. I don't know what the deal is.
Perfect for the podcast, though. So let's continue.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I did radio for over 10 years, so I got the
I can tell you have a fantastic broadcast voice.
And then the one last slide I did want to show was this one because I talked about it earlier, and that is about this desire to build custom models. And this is one of those data points where you really have to dig in, because if you look at the total survey, 13% said they wanted to build their own models, but really that does not at all tell the story. This chart tells the story. And what this chart shows is it was a scale of 1 to 5. How likely are you to, and the top 2 were in blue and the bottom 2 were in orange, and the people who just selected 3 in the middle, I didn't chart just to clean up the data. But so what do you see from here? There's one big blue bar. That means 69% of companies, either in the ICT, which is information, communications, and technology, that is basically the tech industry folks, said they were interested. Nobody else did, right? Single-digit percentages from all the other folks. So what that says is it's really, right now, a lot of the tech industry talking to each other about these capabilities. And so, we've seen this before. So it's going to be a while before some of this stuff goes mainstream. And but it was a really fascinating data point to see that, like, oh my God, look at what a gap there is here, which says, look, a lot of these other industries need to be educated, hence this slide here on the education problem. And these are all quotes from survey respondents about, the things they want to be able to do, because there can be some real value in building your own model, but you need the skill sets in-house, and there's a lot of things to learn and be able to do. So it's going to be a big challenge for companies to vendors who are trying to sell solutions. Hey, no problem. You can build your own models. It's going to be tough for them to be able to do that. It's going to take a lot of work and education to teach them that. So anyway, I think that gives you a pretty decent flavor of what's there.
Oh, it does. And it's extraordinary, the work you've done. What are you looking at next over the next weeks, months, the rest of this year out and about in the industry, in the world? You're busy. You're probably on the road, every other week or so.
Yeah,
what are you looking forward to most out in Gen AI-ville?
I was going to say, what I'm looking forward to most is a vacation to Iceland in 2 weeks. But
fabulous.
Prior to that, yes, I'll be on the road. In fact, headed out to your way to Boston next week, and then the fall is looking pretty crazy. But look, here's a couple things I would say. One, I think what's really going to start to make an impact in the business world, because of what people said they were interested in, which was content creation and productivity. When we see both that Microsoft Office M365 offering go not from a limited beta of a few hundred companies, but widely available, when we see Google Workspace go widely available, and every single person, because we all use these kind of tools, starts to use these things and recognize what they can do, it's going to explode. So I think that is going to be the big pivotal moment, is when we start to see these mainstream productivity applications hit, because literally almost everybody is all of a sudden going to get the wake-up call, like, oh my God, what can I do with this? Then we'll see lots of other industry-specific solutions, and I think where the smaller, I mentioned smaller companies might have a tough time, we will see a lot of companies develop things that are unique to just the pharma industry, or just retail, consumer retail, or whatever. And you'll see those very specialized, tailored solutions. And I think that's where smaller companies will do well. We'll start to see them. But I think once these office productivity suites powered by this stuff hit, it's going to be like, wow, this is really a big deal. So that's what I'm going to be watching over the next months, a couple of months for
Well,
sure.
it's exciting. And as a content creator and tech influencer of sorts, it's the most exciting time in my career. So I appreciate your insight and enthusiasm here. And folks, reach out to Bob to really go deeper into these topics. This has just been a kind of primer for my audience. And thanks so much, Bob, for sharing your
Yeah,
time
thank
and
you, Evan. I appreciate you having me.
the insights. And everyone, thanks for viewing. Thanks for watching. Reach out to myself or Bob with any questions, feedback, and we look forward to the next episode. All right. Well, thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Take care, Bob. Bye-bye.